That gun took everything from me.
Gun violence is plaguing this country.
Some guy with an AR-15 just murdered my daughter.
My mom called and said David shot himself.
But what about the trauma that lingers?
I don't go to bed any night that I don't think of her being blown apart.
This is not something that you come out of unchanged.
PBS NewsHour's latest documentary, Ricochet, sheds light on gun violence across America. It covers the ground between gun violence and its victims, as well as the long-standing and sweeping trauma it leaves in its wake. PBS NewsHour correspondent William Brangham, alongside producers Sam Lane and Sam Weber, spoke to people who've lost loved ones to gun violence or experienced it themselves. William, thank you so much for joining me to give us a glimpse of what this documentary covers. When did this project begin, and what makes it different from NewsHour's previous coverage of gun violence?
Well, Nicole, as you know, what we always go through when there is one of these terrible mass shootings in the country is this seemingly unfortunate cycle where a mass shooting occurs, journalists rush to the scene, they talk to the victims, they talk to the police, they try to understand what happened, where did the gun come from, there's talk of mental health care, there's talk of gun policy, there are thoughts and prayers. And then everybody goes away and we just wait for the next event to happen. And while we also cover gun policy and all sorts of other gun issues on the NewsHour, we realize that it's important to focus on what happens when all the cameras disappear and to talk to the people who the cameras left a long time ago, or for the people for whom the cameras never showed up in the first place. And so we just wanted to look at what is the long-term lasting impact of this gun violence, which goes on in every community in this country, and the larger public health issue we don't really talk about. And so that's what we tried to do in this film.
We as journalists see the statistics around gun violence all the time. What are the things that you think are important for our audiences to take away from this documentary?
That gun violence is not just mass shootings. Those things suck up all the oxygen from the media. But this is an ongoing, slow-moving crisis in this country. 124 people every single day. Happened today, it happened yesterday. Every single day, 124 people in this country die because of guns. 45,000 people die every single year. 120,000 people are injured by a gun every single year. And so while we only focus, or tend to mostly focus, on those more extreme events, we wanted to look at what does it mean, this ongoing process of having this kind of gun violence in this country, and how that trauma is bleeding into everyday lives. I mean, we know, according to one poll, that almost 80% of Americans say that they experience stress as the result of the possibility of a mass shooting. 1 in 3 adults say that they often don't do things in their own lives because of the threat of gun violence. So it is not this just random thing that occurs. It is starting to seep into every person's life in some way or another in this country. And that's what we wanted to explore in this film.
You make a great point about this touching the lives of so many people in America, but you focus on 3 specific characters. What is the impact of this on the lives of Americans across the country, and what went into making the decision to choose these 3 characters?
What we did is we looked at the main ways in which people die by guns in America. And again, people tend to think that mass shootings are killing the vast majority of Americans. They're not. The majority of people die because of guns in America via suicide. That's followed by homicides, and then mass shootings are a very small part of that. So we wanted to look at those 3 particular components. And so suicide, as the leading driver of gun deaths in America, we went to Cheyenne, Wyoming, and talked with a man there who lost his brother to suicide. Cheyenne is, in some ways, Wyoming, the mountain west, the rural west, is sort of the epicenter for suicides in America. It's usually older white males who are dying using guns. And so we talked with a man there who lost his brother and now does work with other people who are survivors. On the homicide front, we centered that here in Southeast Washington, D.C., with a woman named Ryan Nickens, who has lost several members of her family to gun violence. And principally, that violence is falling on, in this country, young Black males. And so she is working in a neighborhood that is largely Black neighborhood in this city and is one of the worst places for gun homicides in America. And then lastly, we wanted to touch on mass shootings because they do take up so much attention. And we talked with Sandy and Lonnie Phillips. They are a husband and wife who lost their daughter 10 years ago in the Aurora mass shooting at that movie theater. And so we tried to, in some ways, to find people who are emblematic of all the different ways in which people die by guns in America and really spend time with them and open up their stories and let people understand what their lives have been like since those tragic events.
This is just a drop in the bucket in terms of how many people this gun violence affects. And we also know that gun violence disproportionately affects Americans of color. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
This is why we started our film with Ryan Nickens here in Southeast Washington, D.C., because of that disproportionate impact in her neighborhood and neighborhoods like them all over this country. We know that Black and Latino Americans are more than twice as likely as white Americans to say that they themselves or someone in their family or friends have been impacted by gun violence. We know that Black Americans are more than 12 times more likely to be the victim of a homicide than white people. So you can't look at those statistics and think that's something that we shouldn't be paying attention to. We spoke to a researcher at the University of Maryland, Joseph Richardson, and he says this is not just an issue for the individual families that are themselves victims of gun violence, but what does it do to an entire community if gun violence is regularly occurring in that community? And we know that gun violence is concentrated in certain neighborhoods, in certain communities in this country. And largely those are minority neighborhoods. There's a very well-known study out of the University of Pennsylvania that points out that for children living in communities where a shooting occurs, they have to only be 2 to 3 blocks away from a shooting for them to show twice as likely are those children going to end up in the emergency room in the weeks after a shooting, complaining of mental health issues, stress, trauma, PTSD-like symptoms. So just think about that. That is happening in communities all over this country where you don't even have to be directly related to the shooting itself, and yet the trauma bleeds out and affects entire communities. So a very good chunk of our film looks at specifically what that means for communities of color all over the U.S.
As you mentioned, you sat down with people who have experienced the horrors of gun violence and have to live with that trauma and grief. But you also chose not to address gun policy, gun control, and the political elements of gun violence and gun policy in this documentary. What went into that decision?
We made the decision early on that we are not going to get into the debate over gun control or gun safety or gun rights because it tends to polarize people. People have their opinions about that and they tend to turn it off when they start to hear contrarian ideas. We wanted instead to sort of take it as a given that we have a strong Second Amendment in this country. Courts have upheld that. There are something like 400 million guns in America. We're taking that as a given because that is the fact that those guns exist. So we wanted to look at, well, what does that mean? If we're going to be okay with this idea that we have a country awash in guns, what does that mean?
You feature 3 vignettes of people who have turned their trauma and their experiences with gun violence into action. Tell us a little bit about what they did.
We wanted in some ways to show that there are ways in which people can turn this trauma into something powerful and redemptive. It's certainly not the norm. It certainly should not be expected of everyone that if you have a trauma like this in your life, that you suddenly become an activist or you start doing things in your community. I mean, that's a completely unrealistic expectation for most Americans. But we did feel that it was important to include people who have in some ways turned their trauma into action. And so Ryan Nickens, who we start the film with, she is running a center now for young people who, like her, had some kind of trauma related to guns early on in their lives, and she's trying to help them through that. Dan Hedrick, the man we spend time with in Wyoming, who lost his own brother to suicide, now is part of a rapid response team that counsels people who similarly have lost someone to suicide. And Sandy and Lonnie Phillips, the couple who lost their daughter in the Aurora mass shooting, now travel around the country, going to every mass shooting that occurs and trying to talk to other parents, other families that have been through what they have been through. So again, we wanted to show that there are people out there who are trying to help others go through this, but it is, again, a very, very tall order. And these people are, in some ways, doing remarkable work trying to help other people who have walked in their shoes.
What was the most impactful part of this reporting, and who were the most impactful people that you followed?
I mean, yes, this was, I think, a moving experience for Sam Lane and Sam Weber and myself, the two producers who I worked with. And we don't often in our business get the opportunity to really spend long time with people. I mean, the nature of doing a daily news program sometimes means you go somewhere, you do the reporting, and then you leave. And in this documentary, we really tried to sit with people for much longer periods of time and to really let them tell their stories. And I think personally, one of the things that just came through in all of these stories and all the people that we met is just that gun violence and gun trauma changes people in a fundamental way. One of the researchers we spoke with, Jennifer Carlson at the University of Arizona, said that this does change people, that this is a uniquely traumatizing experience, and it changes people politically, financially, emotionally. It sort of, in some ways, upsets their whole sense of how the world ought to be ordered. And that's what really came through in all of the stories and all of the survivors that we talked to, that this is not something you move on from, that this is in some ways such a signal event for so many people that it changes them. And that's what we try to convey.
Thank you so much for joining us, William. We now turn to the premiere of PBS NewsHour's latest documentary, Ricochet, An American Trauma.
This program was made possible by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
Let's return now to our top story, the continuing epidemic of shootings.
Since Friday night, 85 shootings, 14 homicides.
On Saturday afternoon, 10 people shot and killed.
A country with hundreds of millions of guns has become almost numb to daily reports of deadly shootings.
Investigators say at least one suspect fired and hit 19-year-old.
But the trauma of this violence goes far beyond the staggering loss of the 124 people who die every day from guns in America.
It's really important to move beyond this idea that we have a gun violence problem in the United States and actually think about it in terms of a gun trauma problem in the United States.
It's a trauma rippling through cities nationwide.
That bullet, that gun took everything from me.
Being shot may be one event that's traumatic, but witnessing violence in your community is traumatic. Chronic exposure to violence is traumatic.
Mass shootings puncture the sense of safety in public places.
I don't look at any picture of her without thinking of her last seconds.
And suicides, often unseen, account for more than half of gun deaths.
My mom called and said David shot himself. My heart sunk, and I knew that it was horrible.
Tonight, a PBS NewsHour special report on the deeper toll of gun violence in America. I'm William Brangham, and this is Ricochet, An American Trauma.
It was a quiet, working-class family community, and the most you got was an argument, maybe a fist fight. And then the crack cocaine epidemic hit. And at age 8 was the first time I saw violent crime. There was a man laying here who had been shot. And so as an 8-year-old, just standing just some feet away and watching literally the life leave a person, leaves an everlasting imprint. For me, that was just the beginning of a whole life full of tragedy and trauma related to guns. My name is Ryan Nickens. I've lost my brother Ronnie, my sister Tracy, and my uncle David to gun violence in our nation's capital. By the time I was graduating from high school, I'd already had over 15 instances where gun violence had plagued my life.
Ryan was just 12 years old when her uncle David was shot and killed in southeast Washington, D.C. It was a case of mistaken identity, she says, never solved.
It was that moment where D.C. was kind of becoming the murder capital of the world. Growing up in the neighborhood that I grew up in, as sure as the sun rose, there would be bullets flying. Everything is survivor mode. After the bullets stop, you hope, you pray that it's not somebody you love, and then you pray for the family of who it was. That was what we did in our community. There is a part of my life that this neighborhood stole, that people in this neighborhood stole from me. My ability to trust was stolen in this place. It was taken.
When Ryan was 15, her family got into an argument with a neighbor, and her older sister Tracy, almost 9 months pregnant at the time, was shot and killed.
So it's like, okay, who protects me at this point? Because my sister Tracy was my protector. That sense of protection left for a long time when she died. So 15-year-old me, 22 days after my family was attacked and my sister was killed, on Christmas Day, drank a whole bottle of NyQuil, took some pills prescribed to my mother, I don't know what they were, and laid and prepared myself for my death because I did not believe life was worth living anymore. That bullet, that gun took everything from me. And so when I woke up, I was pissed. I was pissed at God. I was pissed at everybody because it's like, if pain is all I'm going to be dealt, I simply just don't want to be here. I don't want to be here. There were multiple suicide attempts. And so my parents sent me to therapy. I remember my first therapist, this Black woman who I went to see twice a week. We would sit, she would talk, and I would sit there like, I am not crazy. I don't know why I'm here. This thing happened to me. I didn't do anything to deserve it. So why am I being punished with these therapy sessions? Talking about what I did not want to talk about. I felt like healing meant forgetting Tracy. And I didn't want to forget her. I didn't want to forget what happened to her.
3 years later, Ryan's brother Ronnie was gunned down in an alley near their house.
It took a little boy on his way to school to be the one to go home and say, it's a dead body out there. And everybody else around in these surrounding homes heard the shots, probably looked out of their window and went back to bed and literally left my brother out there as if he meant nothing to anybody, as if he were just a dead deer on a highway.
Across the U.S., gun violence has long been the leading cause of death for young Black men like Ronnie. And while Washington, D.C.'s murder rate has fallen in recent years, more people are still shot and killed here per capita than in any state in the nation. So when Ryan graduated high school, she left D.C. for college, hoping to put that violence and trauma behind her.
I think it was my sophomore year. Friends come into town. We're at the Waffle House one night and I hear an argument. Hearing an argument means my antennas are up. Everything is up. I am looking around. All of my senses are up and it is flight or fight. And I didn't want to fight. I just wanted to leave and go and get to what I thought would be safety. And so I went into the bathroom and locked myself into the bathroom. 2 seconds after being in the bathroom, I hear a barrage of gunfire. I just remember that day and back to the trauma of growing up in this. You are keenly aware of your surroundings at all times.
Being shot may be one event that's traumatic, but witnessing violence in your community is traumatic. Chronic exposure to violence is traumatic. And those things play out in different ways. We see them play out in similar to the symptoms that you would see a soldier who's been in battle in Afghanistan or Iraq. They're very similar symptoms: hypervigilant, hyperarousal, the inability to sleep, the constantly worrying about your environment and whether you're safe or not, which actually leads to more people arming themselves, right? Because
you're afraid.
Because you're afraid, because you don't feel safe. If you were to look at a map of where the shootings are happening, you'll typically see those clusters of dots that represent a homicide. When we're talking about community violence, we have to think about it in terms of that's not just a dot. That's someone's life, and then there are people that are part of the ecosystem that were attached to that one person. And then cumulatively, if all of those dots are clustered in that one neighborhood, what does that mean for the people who are suffering from that trauma every single day?
Healing is a lifelong thing. And just because I go on with my life does not mean Tracy didn't exist. It doesn't mean David didn't, that Ronnie didn't, and that so many others did not exist, and that these things did not happen to our family. It means that I take our good memories and I keep them with me. They are my blessing. And those bad ones I learn to deal with and create, if I can, something good out of it.
So this was all filled with trailers. In this area here, there were about 25 of them. Everyone was full of surplus stuff. Field jackets, old canteens, old mess kits. You pick it, you name it, it was there. And I mean, it was just like piles of stuff everywhere. And it was my little brother's job to start folding this up when the family decided to sunset the business, and it was kind of a hard task for him. I think he got overwhelmed, and I think that was part of what made him take his life. My name is Dan Hedrick. I go by Dano. I lost my younger brother to suicide 11 years ago in our hometown here in Cheyenne, Wyoming. David was a mixture of a lot of different people. He could be so much fun, but he could get really angry, and I mean just red-eyed angry for no logical reason.
David had been a long-haul trucker and a railroad worker. A series of injuries saddled him with years of chronic pain, coupled with what Dano says were untreated mental health issues.
He had had an attempt like a year and a half or 2 years beforehand, and the thought popped into my mind that, I should really check in on him, because, I haven't seen him in a while, and he gets mad at things and happy, and, I should check in on him. Well, I was headed to an appointment with business. I said, no, I'll do it later. It'll be okay if I do it later. There was no later. The next morning, he was gone, and I beat myself up over that. Sometimes pretty severely. And it's gotten to where I can kind of forgive myself about that, but it takes a long time to where you get to where it doesn't bother you as much.
You said kind of forgive yourself, so you're still...
Oh yeah, I'm still beating myself up about it. Every time I go by that stretch of interstate, it always pops in my mind. Sometimes it's fleeting. Sometimes it hangs around and lets me stew over it a little bit, but I've kind of forgiven myself. I haven't quite figured out how to do it totally yet. I'm working on that part.
Here, let me do this.
Okay.
Because it's easier.
We'll pretend we're going down the aisle.
Yeah.
Dano's 84-year-old mother, Zola, lives in a small house on the family property.
Well, I haven't hung a lot of things back up. That was a picture that we used at the funeral, and it was probably the last picture that was taken of him.
Yeah. Yep.
And after 10 and a half years,
yep,
I kind of feel that I put it to rest.
When David died, the first few days were, you kind of shell-shocked. My mom called and said, David shot himself. I went to the house, and she was sitting there in her car, and there were police all over the place in a coroner's van, and my heart sunk, and I knew that it was horrible. I went over and sat in the car with Mom, and the coroner, he said, "Do you want to go around and see your brother?" And I said, "Yeah, I would if I could." And I walked around the end of the house, and and there he sat. Actually, there he laid.
David was 42 years old when he died. In taking his life with a gun, he joined a larger trend in the rural Mountain West, where older white men are most at risk of taking their lives this way. Wyoming, in particular, has the highest rate of firearm suicide in the country.
There's losing someone and losing someone to suicide. Emotionally, there's a lot in there to unpack. Often there's guilt and questioning and how could we have stopped it, and then there's the sort of violence, I think, related part. I think there's an additional layer when you have found or seen the person, particularly if it's a firearm suicide, and the violence and the physical trauma there, and just recognize that it is a very violent way for someone to die. And I think if we're gonna have a conversation about gun violence or firearm injury and death in this country, I think it has to include suicide. You have to understand the broad picture, and slightly over half of all firearm deaths are suicide.
This the place?
Yeah. Mom and Dad bought the house, and then David actually lived here, so it became David's house.
I see.
I'm really comfortable going in the house. Sometimes it comes back, sometimes it's just a happy remembrance. It was followed with a lot of sadness.
Yeah, I've been here for 10 years.
Today, Dano's son Jed lives in the house where his uncle died.
I was kind of leery at first. I myself have kind of struggled with kind of some of the same things that my uncle has. So it was definitely kind of a concern for me. Now, I've come to terms with it. I still think about it. It's maybe not every day, but a couple times a week.
Let's go.
What?
I guess also because he did it in the backyard, when I'm out mowing and stuff, it's something that brings it to mind.
Whenever Jed gets married and has kids and I go over there for a barbecue, that spot in the yard is still going to be there. And no matter how flat he has it, I will see that it's had a little divot there that it had before David took his life, and I saw him laying in that spot.
Come on, Peter, come on.
You settle into this sorrow, and I think I'm at that point. He comes up every once in a while, and it's kind of like, "Hey dude, how you doing? You screwed up. I still love you. Kind of." The business itself, honestly, I hated it because I felt it took my little brother from me. It gave a lot of good things too, but it's been like an extra sibling that I had to compete with because everything was about the business and the store and doing stuff like that. around the death itself, David's bloop, the bubbles and the ripples that have come out from that there's just all kinds that happen. I mean, my entire world here, you know, sitting in a shop that I used to build my cars with, is going to go away because the family had to sell it. It has its own memories, and just these little things, as those ripples go out, it's like, he's not there, you know, and you can kind of look back and say, if he were here, this would be different.
Baby.
Yeah.
Your napkin.
You want me to use it?
Mm-hmm. I don't want you to have to change. The only reason we got married was because of Jessie, my daughter. She came home from middle school. We were living together. And she goes, Mommy, do you love Lonnie? And I said, oh, very much. Why? And she said, he loves you, right? He's asked you to marry him, hasn't he? And I said, yes. And she said, well, why won't you marry him? And I said, well, you know, your dad and I had a tough divorce, and I don't want him to take it all on. And, you know, she looks at me, and she says, well, you have to set a good example for me, Mom.
That really happened. She was like a racehorse, you know, just high-spirited, high-strung, and just powerful, and she's kind of a tomboy, and she loves rough stuff. That's why she took to hockey so much. She'd sneak up behind me and she'd punch me real hard on the shoulder and run off laughing and giggling, and so I would chase her, and that was just a game we played.
We are Sandy and Lonnie Phillips, and our daughter Jessie was slaughtered in the Aurora Theater massacre in 2012. She had just moved into this new apartment and wanted to take her friend to a movie. I think I texted her one other time to say, you know, have a good time with Brent, and that was it. And she said, Mom, I can't wait for you to get here. I need my mama. And I wrote back, I need my baby girl. And that was the last text we had with each other.
If you're just now joining us, a lone gunman opens fire in a theater outside of Denver, Colorado in Aurora.
20 minutes later, the phone rings, and it's Brent. And I thought, why is he calling me? They're at the movies. That's just weird. And I picked up the phone and I said, hey babe, what's up? And I could hear the screaming going on in the background. And he said, there's been a shooting. And I said, oh my God, are you okay? And he said, I think I've been hit twice. And I knew right then that if Jessie was okay, she'd be making that phone call. I said, where's Jessie? And he said, I tried. And I said, is Jessie okay? And he said, I tried. And I said, oh God, Brett, please tell me she's not dead. And the phone went dead. And I knew. I knew.
When I heard that scream, it was like, damn, somebody's broken into the house. And I ran out of the bedroom into the hallway where she was sliding down the wall screaming, Jessie's dead. How do you know that? And she said, well, Brent just called. She was screaming and loudly, Jessie's dead, Jessie's dead.
The gunman never had to reload. It just, the shots just kept going, kept going, kept going, kept going.
Like so many mass shooters, this one used an AR-15 style weapon. In just a few short minutes, 70 people were wounded, 12 people were killed. Jessie was hit 6 times, her body nearly severed in 2. Her face was almost unrecognizable.
The headshot left a 5-inch hole in her face and blew her brains out. Is that the image that you would want of your child for the rest of your life? Because it's the image I have of my daughter for the rest of mine. I don't go to bed any night that I don't think of her being blown apart. I don't look at any picture of her without thinking of her last seconds.
And as badly, she hated loud noises and the thought of her trying to hide behind.
She hated fireworks.
Hide behind those theater seats, which were like toilet tissue to those bullets. That's an awful feeling. No one knows grief. No one knows grief until they really feel it. You can't explain grief. So you eventually, as time passes, you find that, you can find joy in your life, and you can laugh without feeling guilty. And when it first happens to you, you do feel guilty. How can I be enjoying myself when I know my daughter was killed the way she was? I mean, it's not like just losing a child to violence. It's so horrifically devastating.
And here we are, 10 years out, and it's a very different kind of grief. It's a longing. At first it's just despair and this missing piece of yourself. And now it's more of a longing that I wish she was still here. I wish I could hear her clip-clops of her high heels coming up the walk. I cry still, often, but it's momentary. It's not, I've got to go to bed and cry. I just break out into tears, and then I get it back together and go on.
After she died, she posted something on her that I didn't see. When she posted it, it was on Father's Day, and I never saw it. And it said, I love this man. See what happens. The minute he taught me to love. He taught me how to throw a punch. I love this man. So you see how quick it comes back. It never leaves you, 10 years.
And yet people will turn around and say, aren't you over it yet? And it's like, how do you get over your child being taken from you so violently? How do you don't get over that. So don't ever say, aren't you over that yet? Or it's time to move on. You don't move on, you change.
With a traumatic event like firearm violence, it's not something that is addressed and dealt with and is done. It's not something where we can expect people to resume the life they had before. It fundamentally alters people physiologically, psychologically, socially, financially, politically. This is not something that you come out of unchanged. And in fact, that's kind of why it's traumatic, because a traumatic experience is one that shakes your understanding of reality, shakes the sort of coordinates of what you could presume about your sense of safety, security, standing in the world.
I feel unsafe. That's the best way to describe it, is I never feel safe. I always have to have a backup plan wherever we go. I check for exits immediately. I usually try to go to familiar places when I'm by myself.
Jenna Long still carries the trauma of what she experienced in that movie theater in Aurora 10 years ago.
I'm scanning constantly, and then if I see a person that I feel like is a threat or is following too close, I'll actively try to move as fast as I can away from them. I'm very vigilant about everyone that's around us, so I can't describe it completely, but it's just terrifying every time. Now, I'm used to that feeling where it's been 10 years and it still feels like yesterday. I didn't really start talking about this until 2 years ago.
8 years into this, you were still holding that at bay?
Yeah, I was just pushing it down, so that way, and it was easier, I'll let you know that sometimes, to push it down, but not all the time, because then it would explode into this crazy meltdown.
One of the things that I think really shapes how people in the US think about social problems in general, but most certainly about gun violence, is that it's someone else's problem. And I think what happens with mass shootings and the increase in mass shootings and also increase in mass shooting coverage is that ability to say it's someone else's problem gets chipped away. People, maybe even without realizing it, consciously are actually very often thinking about guns and gun violence as shaping their everyday decisions in life and what they do and where they go. And so that means thinking about gun violence when we, go to a concert, when we drop our kids off at school, when we do a whole host of things that 20 years ago, gun violence was not at the top of our minds as we did those activities.
I lift for my mental clarity, to be able to, I know that whenever I'm really anxious, it's the one thing that's going to get me out of my head where I can be calm. I focus on lifting, not on anything else around me. It's the one and only time that I can do that. Then it's not a problem. I always felt guilty about surviving. So I tried to push that down because that wasn't fair to me either, right? Like, to feel that way, but I felt
because
like—
you walked out and—
Because I walked out, and I know, and like one of my coworkers didn't. I just felt guilty that I did survive, for a long time. And so I didn't really talk about it because I was like, almost felt like I was bragging that I survived, I guess.
Even if we were able to snap our fingers and get rid of all the guns and ensure that not a single person would be victimized again by a gun, we still have hundreds of thousands of gun violence survivors every year that are dealing with the trauma of living through the afterlife of gun violence. And so what are we doing for them?
The three pictures in front of you all are my brother Ronnie, my uncle David, and my sister Tracy. Tracy and Ronnie, I took the first three letters of their name and created the Trayvon Center in honor of my sister and brother's memory. All three of my family members were killed due to gun violence. How many of you have lost a friend, loved one to gun violence? They are growing up in communities that are generationally hotbeds for gun violence. It's hurting them and it's preventing them from advancing. It's stunning their emotional growth, and it's hurting them educationally. They deserve to simply be children. I feel like my childhood was robbed, and I don't want theirs to be robbed. I want them to have their moments, their silly moments.
The kids at the Trayvon Center play games, they do art projects, and take field trips. They can also visit with mental health professionals.
I don't understand why young people have guns.
Well, why do young people have guns? For protection. A little boy on his way to school, elementary school child, found my brother's body on his way to school. So that morning, a child was traumatized. The question I asked myself as I began to think through the Trayvon Center is, where's that child? And how many other dead bodies have that child stumbled upon? Is that child still alive? Where is this child who found my brother's body? And what has his life been since that moment?
There have been studies which found that children who are chronically exposed to violence, even if they're not witnessing it, if they live within a few blocks of where a shooting occurred, they're more likely to show up at their emergency department for trauma and for mental health issues. So it's not just a matter of being exposed to the violence and witnessing it directly. It can be secondary or vicarious. You can hear about someone that was shot in your neighborhood. You can have a relative who was injured. You can visit a hospital. So all of those things play a role.
Our kids were bringing bullets that they found just laying around their neighborhood for show and tell to the program.
Bullet casings.
Mm-hmm. To the program. And it's like, where'd you get that from? And we have to have this conversation about what that bullet can do, that they know the bullet can do, that this is not something you bring for show and tell. This is not something you carry around. This is not something that you should even know about at this age, but they know about it.
Do you all agree? Yes.
My greatest fear is losing one of the kids in my program. And I promise you, every time there is a shooting in and around their communities, and they say a teen, I make phone calls. I text. I look at the description of the teenager, of the block. It is literally hell until I figure out who it is.
Like a jungle gym.
Jawan Pinkard works with Ryan at the Trayron Center.
The neighborhoods are so traumatic and they don't even know it half the time. Half the stuff they're seeing, that it could just be so detrimental to their mindset and where they could go in life.
He grew up around this neighborhood too, and tries to remind the kids of the lessons he learned.
Walk straight, head high, 10 toes. That's how.
10 toes?
Yes. Always on your feet, yes. So when I tell them be aware of everything, it's just more so about the people. And if you notice anything out of order, any unusual cars, any unusual people, anything just not in the normal, that you feel out of order. If you feel it's out of order, most times than not, it is.
Is that exhausting to have to be?
Extremely exhausting. Nobody wants to look over their shoulder all the time. No, it's extremely exhausting to be worried about if your neighbor can do this or somebody's going to come through your neighborhood or anything. It's extremely exhausting to not feel 100% safe in where you live.
It breeds hopelessness. And it just breeds this notion that nobody cares, that we are islands unto ourselves, left to solve our problems that we didn't necessarily create, but you are an island. And there is a sense of hopelessness, and when you don't have hope, that trauma sits there. Because if you talk to a shooter, and you ask them, who have you lost? What's happened to you? And in life, they can tell you about 3 or 5 people who've been killed. And it's a survival instinct. Most people aren't born killers. They are created. We have created killers in America. We've done that, and they have been created by circumstance.
We can prevent gun violence. We know that we can prevent it. There have been numerous studies that have been done which suggest the ways that we can prevent it by addressing concentrated poverty, by addressing the dysfunction in schools, mass incarceration, hyper-policing of communities, food deserts, medical deserts, providing access to quality health care. All of these things can contribute to reducing the level of gun violence that we have in our communities.
Me and my friends, when we talk about the community, we be like, you heard them shooting last night? You heard them shooting last night?
That numbness is them protecting themselves emotionally from what they see. But our deal with them is, let's talk about it so that it's not buried, so that you're not sitting in a therapist's office. 20 years later, writing down a list of every traumatic thing that's ever happened to you related to a gun, that the numbness does not settle in so deeply that they can't empathize and feel that this is wrong. This is not normal. This does not happen in every community, and question why it continues to happen in theirs.
We talk about anything, just little things to help ease the stigma of being a suicide loss survivor. As I started working with different people in the support groups, that kind of helped me in a really, really, really safe place pull that trauma out and look at it and figure out how to make it less powerful, and make it heal. When there's been a suicide, the coroner calls us in. I have a team of us that go out and meet with the survivors, and we start to tell them, okay, this is what you're going to start feeling. You're going to lose your memory. You're going to stop eating. You need to eat. You need to drink a lot of water because you're going to cry. Please cry, but make sure you hydrate yourself afterwards. And then we start keeping track of
Such incredibly practical things.
Yeah, it's the little things that you miss.
I was so grateful when somebody was coming that day. I mean, I knew that we would go to counseling, but to have somebody that quickly kind of tell us that we're going to help you down this path, because it is a very lonely place to be.
Andrea Allen lost her teenage son to a gun suicide last October. Cole Allen was off at his freshman year of college. He'd been away from home for just 5 weeks.
After Cole passed away, there were some people that commented on how he passed away. I had people tell me, suicide's for cowards and all this stuff. And I'm like, did you know Cole very well? Because if you knew Cole, then you knew that kid wasn't a coward. And they don't know how it feels unless it's actually happened to their family.
Molly does high school rodeo, and Cole had done high school rodeo for all of his career. And I didn't know there was a problem with cowboys and suicide. That pull your bootstraps up, and we don't ask for help, we just take care of it. And we can't have the kids thinking that way, because they don't have the resources to fix this.
It's like, okay, I can cowboy through this. Watch me. And
cowboy through this, right?
Yeah, that's, you know, and out in Wyoming, that's some of the problem we have. It's, you know, people are out on the range, out on the ranches. Out at my house, it's a football field in any direction to a neighbor, you know, and there's places that you pull into that you can't see a neighbor for 3, 4, 5, 10 miles. And you have somebody that's out there that hasn't addressed their mental issues. It's a perfect storm if all of the elements come together for them.
The isolation and the stigma around mental health care from this so-called cowboy up attitude becomes even more complicated in a place with so many guns. Wyoming has one of the highest rates of gun ownership in the country.
I had many regrets about leaving the gun with him. And there was a moment that I was like, ooh, I don't know if we should do that. But Cole has worked with firearms since he was 8 years old. He's been in 4-H. Cole knew how to use firearms. He knew what they were for. He'd been hunting. He and Molly both have deer. It was just part of our family. I mean, it's a tool. Yeah, it made it easier. But as a mom, yeah, I had that moment but hindsight, there were lots of those moments. I don't blame it on the gun.
It's not that having a gun in the home somehow prompts suicidal behavior. It's that in that moment, if someone reaches for a gun, 90% of the time they die. There's still a lot of stigma that somehow suicide is inevitable, or it's just their personal decision, it's none of my business. But we know actually it is preventable, and we know that most people who attempt suicide are in a temporary crisis and they get better. So when people are in the midst of crisis for whatever reason, they might not be thinking straight, and that's a time when you don't want to be around dangerous objects.
As part of its different suicide prevention efforts, Dano's organization distributes these free gun locks.
It's got a little cable that comes out that would go through in the gun, and it's got a lock. We've suggested people take the keys and freeze them into a block of ice. That, okay, if you want to take your life, you set the block of ice there and you...
Because the time that it would take to thaw,
yep.
What?
They're going through analyzing, is this like a really good idea? It's interrupted the suicidal thought.
Did he have anything else, like a rifle?
No, he just had, like, you know, your basic little gun.
Yeah, okay.
I don't know much about guns.
As an ER physician, every day I see someone at risk of suicide, but I don't see many cases where someone has shot themselves in a suicide attempt, because people usually die at home. But I remember vividly one case where a middle-aged individual who had tried to die by suicide, by shooting themselves in the head, did make it to the ER. But it was clear very quickly it was a completely non-survivable injury. And their spouse was there, and we had a chance to talk. And it was just so clear to me that if they hadn't had a gun that morning, that things would have been fine. It was, they were having the spouse said, stupid fight that wasn't even a big deal. And
it's a storm that would have passed.
Totally. And they made a choice that they couldn't take back. And if that choice had been with pills or something else, I would have been sitting with the spouse talking about hospitalization and what was coming next. But instead, I sat with the spouse while we withdrew care and the person passed away. And that was the only thing that I could offer that spouse. And it was awful. Like it still sits, and I realize it's not even my family member who died, but it was such a sad situation that the access to this thing that morning is ultimately what led to that outcome.
Okay, which one do you want to listen to today? Do you want to listen to Jackson or Troy? I remember at one point saying, I don't want to be that mother that everybody feels sorry for when I walk into a room. That's that mother, Or that's Jesse's mother, she was killed. That's where your head goes. And he very gently took me by the shoulders and turned me towards him, and he said, that is who you are now.
We have breaking news now for you. Connecticut State Police and SWAT teams are now responding to a school shooting at an elementary school in Newtown. It's roughly 2 hours.
And the way they were covering it, there was just something about the way the news was breaking. My gut just knew. It just knew it was going to be bad. And as those people, those lovely families were entering into the community center, I said, oh my God, that's what we looked like 5 months ago.
27 dead, 18 or so of them children in this mass shooting.
That's when we responded to our first mass shooting.
Lonnie, do you want any more coffee before we pack everything up?
No, I just want to get everything done.
Packed up. Okay.
Still grieving the murder of their own daughter, Sandy and Lonnie began what's now become their life's work, traveling across the country to sites of other mass shootings.
We just decided after Sandy Hook, that's what needs to happen. We can be the people that hold that hand, tell them what to expect, what's ahead of them, because we've already been through it. And that can be a gift to whoever else is affected.
It's like this expertise that you never want to have, but now you have it and you might as well.
No, who would want to be an expert in gun violence, God.
That started us on the trek to 21 public mass shootings, with Uvalde was our 21st public mass shooting.
I know that talking with other people who have been through trauma can be traumatic for people who've also experienced something similar like that. And here you guys are putting yourselves in this position of, in some way, constantly reliving this and seeing what you had to go through on the faces and broken hearts of other people. And I just don't know how you have the strength to do that.
For some reason it helps. It helps us as much as it helps the other person receiving it. What's that old adage? If you give it away, it comes back to you tenfold. And it really does. Yes, it is re-traumatizing. And we don't share a lot of our story initially with them. We just say, our daughter was killed in a mass shooting. Same weapon was used if it's appropriate. We know what you're going through. We've walked in your shoes. When we first met this couple in Parkland, I turned to her and I said, I know when you woke up this morning, you said, why am I alive and my child is dead? Why am I still here? And you wanted to die. I understand it, because it was the same thing I thought. Just let me die. I don't want to take another breath. I tell people that if I'd had a handgun in the house, I'm not sure I'd still be here. Because it's that moment of such despair.
Thank you. I'm doing okay.
How are you?
Doing all right.
Yeah.
How are you doing?
Oh, I'm fine.
Yeah?
Sandy and Lonnie came to Washington, D.C. earlier this year to mark the passage of the first major federal gun legislation in decades.
For 7.5 years now, we have been living out of our RV and responding to mass shootings across this country. We have seen the worst of the worst.
You have traveled all over this country and been to so many communities that have been visited by these horrible events. Do you think this country is suffering a collective trauma from guns?
Yes. Yes. We've got to take that whole thing away of, well, unless you were wounded or you had somebody taken from you, you're not a survivor. No, just about everybody in America this day and age has been affected by gun violence. And it's like, if you're not looking around and realizing that, you're in denial. Lonnie and I have always tried to build the bridge from the mass shootings to the individual shootings that, as a friend of mine calls them, slow motion mass shootings that happen every day in America.
And that get no attention.
And no attention, and often no investigation. But you hear these stories, and then you start talking to doctors and lawyers and other people. So you're it's not just the survivor base, it's the other people that are in that ripple. And they start telling you about, oh yeah, we have 8 and 9-year-olds coming into the ER every weekend that are so traumatized and so deeply scarred that they can't function. We have the collective that live in urban America that are being slaughtered every day and nobody's paying attention to. And it's like, this is a traumatized community.
Mass shootings where the victims are white and the shooter's white, that's an American problem. Communal gun violence in Black and brown communities that have been happening for 5 decades, that's just a Black and brown, that's just a Hispanic and Black African-American problem.
Mass shootings happen every day in America. There are 4 more people who are shot every day. And they typically happen in cities with populations of Black people who are the victims or survivors of mass shootings. I'm definitely disturbed by it and the ways that the media often neglects to illuminate Black suffering in similar ways and to provide attention that's given to it almost as if you deserve to be shot, right? And who deserves to be shot in this country?
At some point in our lives, almost every single American is going to know someone who has been impacted by gun violence. So that right there should have us all sit back and say, you know, this is not something that happens out of sight, out of mind. This is not something that only happens when the headlines grab us. This is something that is threaded through society and that touches all of us if we're willing to hear it and willing to acknowledge it and willing to witness it.
Beloved, would you receive this wonderful woman who's doing incredible work curbing violence in Washington, D.C. and around the nation, the Reverend Nicole.
God called me to this work, and this is my life's work. This is, for me, the reason to continue. It is the reason to breathe, to live. It is a joy to be around children who still have all their hope. We try to instill in our kids, you are so much more than what's happened to you. And there is so much more in this world, and you're still growing and you're still realizing things. So don't let this piece be the only piece. It's a part of your story, but don't let it deter from who you are and your worth.
We'd come out here and climb in the mountains and in between the rocks and up and around the rocks and get some really neat scars that, you know, we carry for the rest of our lives. Here in Wyoming, I think that unless it's something that's really visible, a small group of people sees and feels the trauma, and everybody else just goes about their life. You know, you'd think with all of these little grief circles of people who lost people to suicide, you'd think that at some point in time they'd start bumping together and clumping together, and somebody would say, hey, this is wrong, this needs to change, you know, we need to talk about this. And I think it's partially the stigma that keeps that from happening. A lot of people, it's like, well, if we don't talk about it, it won't happen anymore. We're the people that get out there and become the town crier and say, hey, you need to look at this.
I'm a little tired of America building memorials to gun violence survivors and victims and not changing the laws that would prevent it. Sandy.
Pleasure, Sandy.
Lonnie.
Lonnie.
It's survivorship. I think the joy comes from, hey, we've made it for 10 years. And I was just talking to one young lady who got married this last year, and her boyfriend was killed that night. And it's those stories that you realize, okay, there is life after death. There is life that continues on, and again, you find a different kind of joy in what you do and how you live, but you do find it again.
When we see a face that we recognize, you can't help but smile. You know, they're here for the same reason we are, and it feels like a family.
And then to see them 10 years later, how they've grown and matured and are living their lives.
Babies have been born, marriages, as
yes,
you said.
Yes, yes.
Life goes on.
Life does go on.
This program was made possible by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.